Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're starting a new thing where I'm going to be reading from this book, God and Anatomy. We'll start with chapter 1. In June 2018, news platforms across much of the world published a photograph of God. Does this photograph show the true face of God? Shouted one clickbait headline. Science reveals the face of God. And it looks like Elon Musk, teased another. Others, including NBC's website, were rather less sensationalist in their headlines. The face of God in the eye of the beholder. Unquote. The photograph in question showed a fuzzy black and white image of a middle-aged, beardless Caucasian male with a soft, rounded face and just a hint of a smile. The image was produced by researchers at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, who showed a demographically representative sample of U.S. Christians, a series of computer-generated faces embodying certain cultural stereotypes of emotion, ethical, social, and spiritual values, and asked them to select those faces perceived to be the perceived to best reflect their mental image of God. Some of the faces were androgynous in appearance, while others were more feminine and some more masculine. All the faces were gray, like a black and white photocopy, but some were lighter skinned and some were darker skinned. Some faces were expressive, some were seemingly blank, but each face was a canvas onto which the experiment's participants were free to project their own assumptions. The results were averaged out and used to create God's E-fit. Unsurprisingly, the study revealed that in the U.S., God is made in the image of a white American man. Psychologists and social anthropologists have long understood that a very heavy dose of cognitive bias underlies the construction of the divine in human societies. But while modern studies like those conducted at Chapel Hill can tell us something of the psychological and social processes underlying this tendency, this is hardly news. Over 2,500 years ago, in the late 6th or early 5th century BCE, the Greek intellectual and adventurer Xenophanes of Colophon had already arrived at a similar conclusion. Quote unquote, if cattle and horses or lions had hands, or were able to draw with their hands and do the works that men can do, horses would draw the forms of the gods like horses, and cattle like cattle, and they would make their bodies such as they each had themselves. For Xenophanes, the human tendency to make gods in our own image was much about local cultural preferences as overarching, lofty ideas. As the diversity of deities in his world attested, the Ethiopians say their god are broad-nosed and dark-skinned. The Thracians say that theirs have blue eyes and red hair. As far as Xenophanes was concerned, the widespread assumption that the gods had bodies like those of their worshippers was inextricably linked to the notion that deities behave very much like humans. And this was deeply problematic, for it inevitably cheapened the moral nature of the divine. Proof could be found in the Greek myths themselves. And I quote, Homer and Hesiod have attributed to the gods everything that leads to blame and abuse among men, stealing, committing adultery, and deceiving each other, unquote. Xenophanes complained. It was an objection rooted in his philosophically driven insistence that a god was inherently and necessarily a being, quote unquote, in no way like morals either in body or in thought, unquote. Similar ideas were soon championed by other Greek thinkers, most notably Plato, his student Aristotle, and subsequent generations of their elitist learned adherents in the Greco-Roman world, who theorized that the divine power ultimately undergirding the universe and everything in it was necessarily without a body, an incorporeal, invisible, abstract principle, force, or intellect, wholly beyond and distinct from the material world. Not that these rarefied views made much of an impact on the religious lives of ordinary folk, whether they were schooled in philosophy or not, and no matter the deities they worshipped, most people living in the Greco-Roman world continued to envisage their gods as corporeal beings with bodies shaped like their own, much as they always had. But towards the close of the first millennium BCE and into early centuries of the Common Era, these erudite philosophical ideas would gradually come to shape the thinking of certain Jewish and Christian intellectuals, so that they had began to imagine their deity in increasingly incorporeal, immaterial terms, drawing ever sharper distinctions between the heavenly and the earthly, the divine and the human, and the spiritual and the bodily. It is the broadly Platonic notion of the otherness and unlikeness of the divine to anything in or beyond the universe that has shaped the more formal theological constructions of God in the Western religious imagination. And yet these constructions are built on a conceptual framework very much at odds with the Bible itself. For in these ancient texts, God is presented in startlingly anthropomorphic ways. This is a deity with a body. The high God had already spent several days speaking new marvels into being, separating the primeval waters of chaos into heavenly and underworld reservoirs, bringing forth dry land, planting it with fruit, trees, and crops, appointing the sun and moon to light day and night, and commanding the new formed land, seas, and skies to bring forth animals, fish, and birds. Now he was about to speak again. Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, he says to the other deities in his retinue. It is more a declaration than a suggestion, but a good idea nonetheless. For the humans will be tasked with keeping order in the newly created earthly realm. And so the high God makes the very first human. God created the human in his image. In the image of God, he created them. He created him, the new creature, Adam, meaning man or human, bears a bodily resemblance to his divine creator, and is swiftly paired with a female version. Male and female, he created them. Equipped with God-shaped bodies, humans are rendered superior to the other newly made creatures of the world, over whom they are appointed to rule. Blessing humans with fertility, the high God gives them two tasks: to procreate and dominate. They are to fill this new world with their offspring and keep the other creatures under control. Satisfied with his creative accomplishments, the high God decides his work is done. The next day, he rests. In academic circles, there is nothing particularly contentious about this paraphrase of the opening chapter of the book of Genesis. Most biblical scholars would agree that when God says, "Let us make humankind in our image, in our likeness," he is addressing the other members of the divine assembly. The biblical label biblical label given to God's council of lower-ranking deities and divine beings, and most would agree, even if some might squirm a little, that in being made in the image and likeness of the gods, freshly minted humans bear a visual resemblance to their own deities, just as Adam's son Seth is later said to be the image and likeness of his father. In other biblical texts, divine statutes are the image and likeness of the gods they represent. Written in about the 5th century BCE, but drawing on older mythologies, the creation story that now begins the Bible reflects a time when Yahweh, the deity of Jerusalem, now better known as God, had yet to be imagined as the only divine being in the universe. The Babylonian deity Marduk, or the Greek god Zeus, this ancient deity had long been cast as the king of the cosmos, but like them, he was far from alone in the heavens. Above all, he was still several centuries away from becoming the immaterial, incorporeal abstraction of later Jewish and Christian theologies. Instead, he was just like any other deity in the ancient world. He had a head, hair, and a face, eyes, ears, a nose, and a mouth. He had arms, hands, legs, and feet, and a chest and a back. He was equipped with a heart, a tongue, teeth, and genitals. He was a god who breathed in and out. This was a deity who not only looked like a human, albeit on a far more impressive, glamorous scale, but who very often behaved like a human. He enjoyed evening strolls and hearty meals. He listened to music, wrote books, and made lists. He was a god who not only spoke, but whistled, laughed, shouted, wept, and talked to himself. He was a god who fell in love and into fights, a god who squabbled with his worshippers and grappled with his enemies, a god who made friends, raised children, took wives, and had sex. This portrait of God has not been lifted from obscure myths inscribed on long abandoned clay tablets. It is drawn from the Bible itself, a book as complex as the deity it promotes, not least because the Bible is not a book at all, but a collection of books, falling into two parts. The first is the Hebrew Bible, known in Judaism as the Tanakh, and in Christianity as the Old Testament. And it is an anthology of ancient texts, originally crafted as scrolls. Most of these texts themselves are complex compilations of diverse literary traditions, and the majority were composed between the 8th and 2nd century BCE in Judah, a small southern polity in the ancient Levant, the region we know today as Palestine, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, and western Syria. In the 8th century BCE, Judah was a kingdom captured by Assyria. At the beginning of the 6th century BCE, it was conquered again, this time by the Babylonians. By the 5th century BCE, Judah had become a Persian province, and in about 333 BCE, it was incorporated into Alexander the Great's vast empire. Some Hebrew Bibles tell of Judah's changing political fortunes, while others are stories about legendary. And we'll end it there. I will post this and there'll be more to come. We're on page 12 right now. And that'll be it, guys. Stay tuned for the next part.